How you doing it? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yomi, Daf 57 of Nesech Avodah Zarah. Friends, your friends. So, sheesh. So at the end of the Daf yesterday, we started getting into the very tricky mission of classifying yayn nesech. How to identify when we have a situation of yayn nesech and how yayn nesechi is it? How usr is it? How mutter is it? So the topics, two main topics today. Topic number one is touching wine unintentionally. Sounds simple, but we will see how simple it just is. And number two, a 1-day-old baby making yayn nesech. Okay, also very interesting with lots of layers to it. Well, without further ado then, let us just jump into it. So I'd like to start by actually referencing back to the slide that we referenced at the end of the daf yesterday. We're going to reference this slide tomorrow as well, just to remind ourselves of all of the different angles to keep in mind as we are learning today's daf and trying to understand how to apply yayn nesech. So some things to keep in mind, for example, is how was it touched, right? It meaning how did the Gentile touch the wine? Directly with his hands? What about with his feet? So yesterday there's a difference between hands and feet. Maybe he was using like a stick or something. Maybe he was holding the wine in a vessel. What was his intention? Was it a complete fluke? Did he intend to touch it, but not to libate it? Right? We saw yesterday maybe he was sticking his hand in to measure how much wine there's. He intended to touch it, but not to do yayn nesech. Maybe he intended to libate, to actually do yayn nesech. We also saw different opinions. In some cases, Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter b'shesiyah, whereas the Chacham say it's also b'shesiyah b'mutter b'ano. How also is it? Also even to sell it, or maybe you could sell it, but you just can't drink it. Also, we're talking about all of it. We're talking about just the value of the yayn nesech in the mixture. Are we talking about yayn nesech? We're talking about stam yainim. How mutter is it? Completely mutter, only to that. Chevra, I just want to remind ourselves that as we are learning these dafs, we have to be asking ourselves every single detail. And even so, we're going to hit, even as meticulous as we are, we're still going to hit some scenarios where it's just like, it's hard to understand exactly what the conclusion is. But here we go. I got some coffee with me today. Okay. We are going to start on Daf Nun Zayin Amid Aleph, about 6 lines into the Amid. Uvda, there was a scenario, great. Dava Beveirim, in a place called Beirim. Dava de Au Oive Kechavim, okay, a Gentile. Dahava Kasolik Bedikla. He was going up a palm tree, Vaisi Luliva. Okay, fine, very nice. A Oive Kechavim was going up a palm tree to retrieve a lulav for a yid. Maybe it was Sukkah's time, and the lulav and the yid asked Oive Kechavim, "Can you go up and get me that lulav kapos tamarim thing?" And he says, "Sure." And he goes and he gets and he brings down a lulav for a yid. Where am I? And then what happened? Things got tricky when on his way down, Noga Berosha de Luliva, Bechama Shelo Bekavana. Woo! Here we go. On his way down, he accidentally, it was a complete fluke. He wasn't intending to take the lulav and touch it to wine. But I don't know, the lulav fell out of his head. Whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know if it sounds like he was probably at least holding it, but one way or another, the tip of the lulav ended up touching some wine. So now what happens? So if we go back to our lots of moving pieces slides, let's try to see which check boxes can we check. Complete fluke. There was absolutely no intention to touch the wine whatsoever. It's a complete fluke. He did not touch it directly. He touched it by way of a lulav. So let's see. So Sharia Rab lizabune lovde kuchavim. So Rav says, okay, the wine can be sold to ovdei kuchavim. Aye, it's mutar ba'ana. It's aser b'shesiyah, but mutar ba'ana. So basically what we have here is a scenario where Rav is saying, seemingly, that if an ovid kuchavim, as a complete fluke, touches wine by way of a vessel, a proxy, didn't touch it directly, so he touched it via a lulav, it is aser b'shesiyah, but mutar ba'ana. Okay, fine. Now, so Amrulay, Rav Kahana Rav Asi Rav, and Rav Kahana and Rav Asi said to Rav, but didn't you say Tinok ben Yomo ose yayn nesech? But Rav Asi and Rav Kahana asked Rav, but Rav, don't you say that a 1-day-old baby can make yayn nesech? So meaning, if a 1-day-old baby makes yayn nesech, shouldn't it be completely osir? So Amalus Rav answers, Emer da Amri ono b'shesiyah banoya mi'amri. So it says, Rav, when I say that a 1-day-old baby makes yayn nesech, I mean makes yayn nesech osir b'shesiyah, to drink, but you can still get benefit from it. And this is what I'm poskening over here, that this Ovid Kuchavim touched the wine unintentionally with a lulav, and it is also b'shesiyah mutar ba'ana. Sheesh. Okay, wow. So what do we have here? We have here a situation where an Ovid Kuchavim, as a complete fluke and indirectly, i.e. he was holding a lulav, touched some wine, and says Rav, it's aser b'shesiyah mutar ba'ana. Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. 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 Wow. All right. Okay. Now, Tosfos Taka asked a kasha. Tosfos asked a kasha. Tosfos asked a kasha. He has two questions, basically. Question number one is that we learn in Daf Samachum Beis that Rav holds like Reb Shimon. Now, Chaver, what did Reb Shimon say? If you remember from the end of the daf yesterday. On Daf Samachum Beis, Reb Shimon says that if an Ovid Kuchavim is measuring wine, let's say there's a barrel of wine, he wants to know how much wine is in there, so he's measuring the wine, and he sticks a measuring stick in to the barrel to see how much wine there is. So he's intentionally putting something into the wine. It wasn't a fluke. He was intentionally putting something into the wine, not for yayn nesech or anything, to measure it. And Reb Shimon says in that case, it's mutar b'shesiyah. You could drink it. So now, here we have a case where there was also in this case, it wasn't a measuring stick, it was a lulav that went into the wine. And in this case, it was a complete fluke. Whereas in the Mishnah Samach Beis, he intends to measure it. He knows that he's putting something into the wine. Here was a complete fluke. And yet, by the measuring stick, Rav passes like Reb Shimon that it's mutar b'shesiyah, that's permitted to drink. And yet over here, he's saying that when it was a complete fluke and the wine was touched via a lulav, it's aser b'shesiyah. How does that make any sense? And Tosfos asks another question that also in Daf Samachum Beis we learn that in a scenario where somebody unintentionally rolls a barrel, not if a Gentile unintentionally rolls a barrel into a wine vat, which basically, technically speaking, means that he's touching a barrel, he's pushing a barrel into the wine, so i.e. he's touching the wine by way of a third party, of a barrel, we're saying if it's unintentional, it's completely mutter. It's mutter. It's completely mutter, even b'shasiyah. So it would seem that when it's a complete fluke, and by way of a third party, it would be mutter b'shasiyah. And yet Rav is saying that it's also b'shasiyah. Remember, Rav Paskin's like Reb Shimon on Daf Samach Amud Beis, who says that it's mutter to drink when you're measuring wine with a stick. And there he intends to put the stick in wine. Here was a complete fluke by way of a lulav, and he's saying it's also b'shasiyah. So therefore, Tosfos says that actually, so Tosfos makes some changes here. This is part of what's so tricky around here, is trying to get all of the different scenarios to play nice with each other. It's not easy at all. So Tosfos actually suggests that the Oved Kochovim didn't touch the wine by way of a lulav. Actually, he touched it directly. It was a complete fluke, but he touched it directly, which is why it's also b'shasiyah. Because when Reb Shimon says, and Rav Paskin's like Reb Shimon, that when Reb Shimon says that if he's measuring the wine with a measuring stick, it's mutter b'shasiyah because it's by way of a stick. But if he touches it directly with his hand, well then it would be also b'shasiyah. So in this case, even though it's a complete fluke, but he touched it with his hand, that is why it's also b'shasiyah according to Tosfos. And Tosfos ends, he says, Taka, V'chein posek Rabbeinu Tam halacha l'maaseh. D'maga oy bekochovim al yedei davar acher sheloi bekavonos maga. Mutter b'shasiyah. Tosfos Taka says at the end, that Rabbeinu Tam even paskins that way l'maaseh, that if the wine is touched by way of an instrument as a complete fluke, it's mutter even b'shasiyah. So therefore, when Rav says here, according to Tosfos, when Rav says here that it's also b'shasiyah, it's actually, it wasn't touched by way of the lulav, he touched it directly with his hands. Sheesh. Okay? I mean, Rashi doesn't make that change though. So, I mean, according to Rashi, he is touching it by way of the lulav, which then, okay, I mean, we got to keep that in mind as we learn through this sugya and are trying to manage all the different scenarios. So, so let's do a Tosfos takeaway over here. So, Tosfos takeaway is that the main question is that how could it be that Rav is saying that when the Oved Kochovim touches the wine unintentionally and via a proxy, via a lulav, it's forbidden to drink? But proof number one against that is that Rav holds like Reb Shimon, who says that it's mutter to drink wine measured with a measuring stick, and there he intends to actually touch the wine by way of the stick, and it's mutter to drink. So how can we say here it's also to drink? And proof number two is that unintentionally rolling a barrel into wine is mutter, i.e., unintentionally touching wine by way of a third party is mutter. So therefore the answer is the wine was touched unintentionally but directly. And that is why it is also b'shasiyah. Okay. Wow, Chevret. So you see, we have to go through this very, very slowly and intricately. Okay, so now for the rest of the daf, really, we're not talking so much about yayn nesech directly. We are more we are more discussing the shita of Rav, this opinion of Rav that we just saw, that a tinok ben yoma, that a 1-day-old baby can make yayn nesech also b'shasiyah. Mutubano, but also b'shasiyah, where you see it's taka machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. So Rav says that it's right, that a 1-day-old baby can make wine also b'shasiyah mutubano, whereas Shmuel says no, a 1-day-old baby won't make the wine also b'shasiyah, i.e. it's mutter b'shasiyah. Now, without getting into Tosfos, there's a long Tosfos on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis. So Tosfos quotes Rashi as saying that Ovdei Kochovim nowadays, since they don't really do Avodah Zarah generally, they're not, most Ovdei Kochovim, most Gentiles nowadays, most non-Jews who touch a bottle of wine are probably not thinking, let me let me libate it to an Avodah Zarah. They probably wouldn't even know where to get started. It's just not part of their experience. So therefore, they could be considered like a Tinuk Ben Yomo. But it's an interesting, what are the implications of that? Who do we paskin like Rav Shmuel? But anyways. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, without getting it, but it's just interesting to note that what are the implications of Tinuk Ben Yomo. Oh, sheesh. But also, I mean, there's another difference that Tosfos points out. It's just important for our thinking, though. Is that a Tinuk Ben... All right, I might just be saying Tinuk Ben Yomo. That's okay. A Tinuk Ben Yomo has no intention whatsoever. Complete fluke. It's a little baby. Whereas over the Kochavim, there would be Kavanas Maga, which is a difference. Right? Again, this is all part of like the Shikulim. Right? So like, it's part of the question is how exactly can you really say that an Ovid Kochavim Bizman Hazeh is like a Tinuk Ben Yomo? Sure, you might not be, Avodah Zarah might not be on his mind. But again, there's different stages of touching. There's complete fluke. There's intending to touch, but not to libate, which is what would be the Ovdei Chom Bizman Hazeh. And then there's intending to libate. So we say, okay, the Ovdei Chom Bizman Hazeh isn't that. But a Tinuk Ben Yomo is a complete fluke. It's a little baby. Whereas over Chom, there would be intention to touch. So anyways, I'm mentioning it. It was a very long Tosfos, and the conclusions are a little bit kind of like, okay, just keep on doing what you're doing. Don't make any changes. Make her right. I mean, what is what Tosfos? It's a little big Tosfos at the end of Nun Zayin Amud Beis says, "V'amachmir tova elavracha." Whoever is stringent, that's right. That's better. So, anyways, I'm just mentioning that Tosfos because I want to kind of like bring home the point and make sure that all of these moving pieces are top of mind and that we're grappling with them and appreciating them as we're working through these scenarios and through this sugya. Okay. So now, we are on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, first wide line. Omar Rov, says Rov, Tinuk Ben Yomo ose yayn nesech. Says Rav, that a 1-day-old baby can already make yayn nesech. It said also b'shasiyah mutar bano, fine. Eisvei Rav Shimi Bachia l'Rav, but Rav Shimi Bachia asks a kasha on Rav. Alekeach avodim mina oivdei kochavim. Okay, so if a person buys avodim kananim, now the locha by avodim, so an Eved Kanani is like a quasi-yid, right? It's chayiv in mitzvahs keisha, and in Eved Kanani does mila and tvila. Does mila and also goes to the mikveh as a sort of conversion to being a quasi-yid. And then, of course, if an Eved Kanani goes free, it becomes a full-fledged card-carrying yid. So, avodim minodik kuchavim. So a person purchases an Eved Kanani. Shemalu v'lo tov. Okay. Now this Eved Kanani did Mila, but never went to the mikveh. I would think going to the mikveh would be the easy part. But anyways, never went to the mikveh. V'chein, similarly, the similarly part is going to be a little bit tricky. Bnei Ashvachis, the sons of the maidservants. So if you have a Shifcha Knainis, and the Shifcha Knainis gives birth to babies, so boys, let's say, right? So right, the Bnei Ashvachis. So those boys, so also would do Mila. So what does it say? So v'chein Bnei Ashvachis shemalu v'lo tavlu. That they did Mila but not Tvila. So now as Rashi points out, that it would mean that at the time that they were born, their mother, the Shifcha Kanainis, had not yet herself gone to the mikveh. If she had already gone to the mikveh, so then the children they would have to do Mila, of course, but they wouldn't have to go to the mikveh. They were born to Shifcha Kanainis, so already went to the mikveh. So they wouldn't have to go to the mikveh. So it's talking about a Shifcha Kanainis who, she herself hadn't yet gone to the mikveh when these babies were born. But these babies were raised in a Jewish home. They were born to a Shifcha Kananist in a Jewish home. So as opposed to the Avodim Kananim, it says they were purchased from Ovdei Kochavim. But the Bnei Hashvachis are, it's a little bit more lenient because they actually grew up in a Jewish home. But they had done Milah, but they hadn't done Tefillah. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Somebody who purchases an Eved Kanani, and the Eved Kanani then did Milah, but not Tefillah. And similarly with the Bnei Hashvachis, who did Milah but not Tefillah. Oh, okay. So this is from a Mishnah in Masechta Nida that the Chacham made a gzeira by Ovdei Kochavim that they should have the status of a Zov. By Midrabana they should have a status of a Zov. Now a Zov, the spit, the Ma'ayanos HaZov, for example, the spit of a Zov, Roka and Miragel, there's urine too, I believe is a Av Hatuma. I believe is an Av Hatuma. So we're saying Rokan umidrasan, also Tumas Midras, so anything that they would put their weight, their body weight on, would become Tome. So okay, so where are we? So Rokan umidrasan, so their spit, anything they put their body weight on, i.e., like a Zav. Bashuk Tame. So even in the Shuk, even in Rishis Harabim, where we say Safek Tuma B'Rishis Harabim is Tahor, and therefore you might think, well, they did Milah, but they didn't do Tefillah, maybe they're like a Safek. No. Even Bashuk, even in the market, even in Rishis Harabim, still, we would say Rokan and Midrason, even in the Shuk, is Tame. Varmilatar, although there is an opinion that says actually Tahor. Okay. Yainon. Okay, now what about their wine? This is of course the part that's relevant for us. What about wine? Gidolim osin yayn nesech. Well, if they are adults, then if they touch wine, it would become yayn nesech. But kitanim ein osin yayn nesech. But if they are minors, they would not make yayn nesech. If they're minors, they would not make yayn nesech. Ve'elu gedolim, ve'elu kitanim. And this is how we classify adults versus minors. Adults know about, are familiar with Avodah Zarah and its vessels and servants and things. Minors don't know about these things. But the important thing for us is that it taught Gedolim in Ketanim Lo. That adults make, however we classify it as adults, but whatever, adults make Yayn Nesech, minors don't. So how could Rav say that a Tinok Ben Yomo makes Yayn Nesech if a Brisa says that only adults would make Yayn Nesech, minors would not make Yayn Nesech? So now Tirgima Abnei Shvachis. Oh, okay. Well, listen up. Gets a little subtle, a little tricky. Well, sheesh. So already in a sugya with many moving pieces, we have a brisa with several moving pieces. Let's just lay out the several moving pieces for a second. We have avodim knainim. We have bnei hashvachis. We have the reisha of the brisa, which talks about rokan umidrasan. And remember, they went to they had Milah, but not Tvila, both by the Avodim Kananim and the Bnei Shvachis. And we're saying when it comes to Rokan, Umidrason, so one opinion says Tameh Bashuk, the other opinion says Tahor. And then the Seifa of the Brisa is talking about Yayn Nesech. There's a distinction between Gedolim and Ketanim. So now the Gemara wants to say that this distinction, so in the Seifa, the distinction between the Gedolim and the Ketanim is only by the Bnei Hashvachis. However, by the Avodim, even Tinok ben Yomo would make yayn nesech. So meaning, Rab had said, Tinok ben Yomo makes yayn nesech. We have a brisa here where we're saying you have Avodim Knainim, you have Bnei Hashvachis. They did Mila, but they didn't do Tvila. So they're not, they didn't complete their conversion. So they're not Jewish. And we're saying that when they're minors, it would not be yayn nesech. But Rav said that it would be yayn nesech. So we say, well, the part about the minors not making yayn nesech, that's by the Bnei Hashvachis who had grown up in a Jewish home, and we're saying that they're minors, they don't even know much about Avodah Zarah. Right? They don't understand yet Avodah Zarah, they grew up in a Jewish home. So in that case, they would not make yayn nesech. But the Avodim Knanim, who didn't yet do Mila and Tvila, they did Mila but not Tvila, then they would make yayn nesech, even if they're a one-day-old baby, and that's how Rav would answer that. But frek the Gemara, Havechein kam. But how can you be saying that in the Sefer by the yayn nesech, Gedolim make yayn nesech, Ketanim don't make yayn nesech, that's only by Bnei Hashvach. It says V'chein. And similarly, that's what the Brisa say. What do the Brisa say? And also Bnei Hashvachos. It sounds like all the halachos are the same. What are you telling me that the Sefer is only by the Bnei Hashvachos? It says v'chein. They're both the same. Arokon u'midrasan. V'chein is only by rokon u'midrasan. There's spit and the medras. So there, when it comes to rokon u'midrasan, the halachos are the same for Avodim Knainim and Bnei Hashvachos. But when it comes to yayn nesech, they are not the same. They're different. Avodim Knainim would make yayn nesech even one day old. Bnei Hashvachos would only make yayn nesech once they are adults. So now, frek Gemara, Hani ch'leman damar tamei, leman damar tar ma'ike lememer shish. So says the Gemara, okay, fine. So you want to say that v'chein, you have the Avodim Knainim, you have the Bnei Hashvachos, and we're saying that they are the same vis-a-vis with regard to Rokon u'midrasan. With regard to yayn nesech, that part is only by the Bnei Hashvachos. Okay, fine. Now we had seen that by Rokon u'midrasan, it was actually a machlokes, is it tamei or tahor? So if we say tamei, okay, that's fine. Meaning, because the shaila is, we have this brisa where we're linking together Avodim Knainim and Bnei Hashvachos. We have Avodim Knainim, B'chein, Bnei Hashvachos. We're linking them together for two halachas. One halacha with regard to Rokon u'midrasan, the other halacha with regard to yayn nesech. And we're saying that applies to both. And then we say, actually, but the yayn nesech part, they're actually not linked. That part's only Bnei Hashvachos. Okay, fine. So we're saying, where are they linked? They're linked when it comes to Rokon u'midrasan. This makes sense if you say that Rokon u'midrasan is tamei. So I need to link the Avodim Knainim and the Bnei Hashvachos, because if I only said that the Avodim Knainim, their Rokon u'midrasan is tamei, I might think, okay, but by the Bnei Hashvachos, we're more lenient because they grew up in a Jewish home. Maybe the Rokon u'midrasan would be tahor. So therefore, we link together the Avodim Knainim and the Bnei Hashvachos to say that in both scenarios, the Rokon u'midrasan is tamei. Okay. But, frek the Gemara, if you say that Rokon u'midrasan is tahor, because it was a machlokas, right? One opinion said tamei, one opinion said tahor. But if you say that Rokon u'midrasan is tahor, well then why do you need to link together the Avodim Knainim and the Bnei Hashvachos at all? After all, at the end of the day, we're already saying that the Sefer by the nesech is not, they're not linked. That's only by the Bnei Hashvachos, not by the Avodim Knainim. And if you're saying that in the ratio by the Rokon u'midrasan, if we're saying it's tahor, well, if you just tell me that Rokon u'midrasan of the Avodim Knainim is tahor, then I know obviously that the Bnei Hashvachos is also tahor because they're more lenient. They grew up in a Jewish home. So why link together the Avodim Knanim and the Bnei Ashvachos Bichlal? Again, at the end of the day, the yayn nesech already, you're saying they're not linked. That's only Bnei Ashvachos. So just tell me in the ratio that when it comes to Rokan and Madrasan by Avodim Knanim Tahor, so just tell me two separate halachas. Don't link anybody together. You don't need to link Avodim Knanim and Bnei Ashvachos. Tell me two separate halachas. Halacha number one, by Avodim Knanim, Rokan and Madrasan is Tahor. Okay, in parentheses, obviously, then I know that by Bnei Ashvachos it's also Tahor because then we're lenient. Okay, so halacha number one, by Avodim Knanim, Rokan and Madrasan is Tahor. Halacha number two, by Bnei Ashvachos, there's a distinction between adults and minors. Adults make yayn nesech, minors don't make yayn nesech. Again, tell me two separate halachas. By Avodim Knanim, Rokan and Madrasan is Tahor. By Bnei Ashvachos, when they're adults, they make yayn nesech. When they're minors, they don't make yayn nesech. I know everything I need to know. Why drive me meshugah about linking together Avodim Knanim and Bnei Ashvachos? So, and for the Gemara or Kamashman, I'll tell you why we have to be made meshugah to link together Avodim Knanim and Bnei Ashvachos. Avodim dumya Bnei Ashvachos because we want to compare Avodim to Bnei Ashvachos. Ma Bnei Shvachos malu v'lo tavlu hu de'ose yayn nesech. Because just like by the Bnei Ashvachos, we say that when they're adults they can make yayn nesech. That's because while they did Mila, they haven't yet done Tvila. Malu v'tavlu, lo. But once they've gone to the mikvah, then the card carrying, well, they would still be, I guess, avodim. So the card carrying half yidden, and they would not make yayn nesech anymore. Avodim kain. The same thing would apply to avodim. So the reason why we're made meshugah to link together Avodim Knanim and the Bnei Ashvachos is to teach us a halacha that they're in the same boat with regard to that this brisa is only because while they done Mila, they haven't yet done Tvila, and that's why Bichlal we're talking about making yayn nesech. But just like by the Bnei Ashvachos, if in addition to Mila they also went to the mikvah, they would not make yayn nesech because they're Jewish now, or at least quasi-Jews. So the same would apply to Avodim Knanim as well. If they did Mila and Tvila, they wouldn't make yayn nesech. La'afuke midu Rav Nachman, to the exclusion of Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, of Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel's shita, to Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, halokeach avodim min ha'ovdei kochavim, somebody who purchases avodim Knanim, afal pisha malu v'tavlu, even though they did Mila and Tvila, osin yayn nesech, they still do make yayn nesech. That says Shmuel that Avodim Knanim, even though they did Mila and Tvila, they would still be able to make yayn nesech until, as we're going to see in a minute, 12 months would be enough time that Keilu, they would no longer, in their minds, be committed to Avodah Zarah. But says Shmuel, an Eved Kanaini, even after Mila and Tvila, can still make yayn nesech. So therefore, so we're saying this brisa though links together Avodim Knanim and Bnei Ashvachos to say that just like Bnei Ashvachos, once they did Mila and Tvila, they don't make yayn nesech. So the same is by the Avodim Knanim. Once they did Mila and Tvila, they don't make yayn nesech. And this goes against Shmuel, who says that Avodim Knanim would still make yayn nesech until they stop having Avodah Zarah as part of their worldview. No, so where are we? Before we move on for a second, so where are we? Well, Rav had said that a one-day-old baby can already make yayn nesech, also b'shtia mutabano, but also b'shtia. We brought a raya from a brisa. Well, we asked a kasha from a brisa where we said that by Avodim Knanim, Bnei Ashvachos, if they're adults, they make yayn nesech. If they're minors, they don't make yayn nesech. To which we said that was only specifically by Bnei Ashvachos, because they grew up in a Jewish home. But Avodim Knanim and certainly of the Kochavim as well, they would be able to make yayn nesech even as a one-day-old baby, according to Rav. Now says the Gemara, Gufe, Omar, Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Lokeach avodim min ha'ovdei kochavim. somebody who purchases avodim, right? Avodim knainim. Afapisha malu v'tavlu, even though they, right, by ovdei kochavim, even though they did mila and tvila, osin yayn nesech, they could still make yayn nesech achetishka avodas kochavim mipiyim until they are no longer connected in any way, thinking it until avodas kochavim leaves their mouth. They're no longer talking about it. I imagine it's like no longer part of their experience. How long does this take? 12 months. It could take up to 12 months. Okay. Now, Rabba basically asked the same. It's basically the same structure as a kasha as we just saw against Rav a second ago from the same exact brisa. Halakech avodim mina ovdei kochavim. Somebody purchases a eved kinaini shemalu v'lo who had mila but not tvila. V'chein b'nei hashvachos, and similarly to b'nei hashvachos, again this is the same brisa. Shemalu v'lo mila but no tvila. Rokon and midrason, their spit and their tumas medris, if they put their weight on something, bashuk tame, even in the rishus harabim, even in the market, tame. V'amidatar, and some say it is tahor. Yenon, when it comes to their wine, gidolim osin yayn nesech, adults would make yayn nesech, kitanim ein osin yayn nesech. But if they are minors, they would not make yayn nesech. Elu ein gidolim, this is how we define an adult. Ve'elu ein kitanim, and this is how we define a minor. Gidolim sheyodim mitiv avodas kochavim shamshel. An adult would be, for these purposes, considered somebody, right, an eved kanani or a bnei shvachis, who understand Avodah Zarah and how to service it. Kitanim and minors would be considered she'en yodim mitiv avodas kochavim shamshel, that they don't understand Avodah Zarah and its practices. Okay, katani mias malu velo tavlu in, malu v'tavlu lo. So the kasha on Rav Nachman is, how could Rav Nachman be saying, Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, but how could, right, we said, right, so Ezra Rabbi Rav Nachman. Okay, so Rabbi is asking kasha to Rav Nachman, we'll use it from the vantage point of Rav Nachman. So how could Rav Nachman be saying that in Eved Kanani who did Mila and Tvila can still make yayn nesech? After all, this brisa, which is talking about yayn nesech and gedolim, ketanim, etc., is specifically where they did mila and not tvila. But if they did mila and tvila, there wouldn't be yayn nesech anymore. So tirgama b'nei hashvachis. Well, Rav Nachman would say, that is by the b'nei hashvachis. By the b'nei hashvachis, if they did mila and tvila, there would no longer be any yayn nesech. But by avodim, there would still be yayn nesech even after mila and tvila, until they're no longer talking about Avodah Zarah. Havachein katani, but it says v'chein. But it says, and similarly, doesn't that mean that it's the same halachis for the avodim knanim and the bnei hashvachis? I rokon and midrason. No, v'chein is by rokon and midrason. It's there, the avodim knanim and the bnei hashvachis have the same halachis, but not by yayn nesech. By yayn nesech they have different halachas. By yayn nesech, b'nei hashvachos, once they have mila and tvila, don't make yayn nesech. However, the avodim kananim still would. Hani chilaman de omar tomit. Well, I understand why we need to link together the avodim kananim and the b'nei hashvachos. If you say by rokan and midrason tame, right? Because again, the shayla, right, as we explained earlier, the shayla was, why do I need to link them b'chlal? Just tell me two separate halachas. When it comes to yayn nesech by b'nei hashvachos, when they haven't yet done mila and tvila, so they can make yayn nesech, but if they have done mila and tvila, then they don't, and then tell me that by avodim knanim, the b'nei, that the of the kochavim, I don't even know what I'm saying. Wait, focus. But and then when it comes to Rokan and Midrasan, say that the avodim knanim, well, the shayla is, why do we need to link them together? So it says, I understand if we say Tomei, because we're saying that even though the avodim knanim are Tomei, I might think that the b'nei hashvachos would be Ta'or, so we have to link them together to say that both are tamei. However, l'man damar tahor ma'ikil lemema. But if you say tahor by rokan umidrasan, so again, why do I need to link together the bnei hashvachas and avodim kananim? Bechad, just tell me two halachas. Tell me one halacha by the bnei hashvachas vis-a-vis yayn nesech, because we're saying that part of the brisa only applies to them, and tell me by ovdei kochavim, that by avodim kananim, that rokan umidrasan is tahor, and certainly then I would know that the same would apply to bnei hashvachas. Why do we need to be linking anything together and confusing things? Hakamash malan avodim dumi de bnei hashvachas. The reason why we are linking them together is to compare the avodim kananim to the bnei hashvachas. Ma bnei hashvachas gedolim hu the osin yayn nesech kitanim ein osin yayn nesech af avodim nami gedolim osin yayn nesech kitanim ein osin yayn nesech. The reason why we compare avodim kananim and bnei hashvachas is to say that just like by the bnei hashvachas, there's a distinction between adults and minors. Minors don't make yayn nesech. So the same applies to avodim kananim. Minors don't make yayn nesech. La'afuke midirab de Omar Rab Tino Ben Yomo Osi Nesech Kamash Melandulau, says Rav Nachman that this brisa is to go against Rav, who says that a 1-day-old baby does make yayn nesech also b'shtia. But here we have this brisa where it says that adults make yayn nesech, minors don't, and we compare avodim kananim to bnei hashvachos to say that in all scenarios minors don't make yayn nesech. So there we have. So Rav Nachman had said the name of Shmuel, right? So there we have a machlekes Rav and Shmuel with regard to if a tinok ben yomo can make yayn nesech. Rav says yes. Shmuel says no. Tosfos points out machlek when it comes to isure, we paskin like Rav. When it comes to bedine, when it comes to mamnas, we paskin like Shmuel. This is a scenario of isure, so we would paskin like Rav to say that a tinok ben yomo does make yayn nesech. We're going to stop here. We're going to stop here. Wow. Okay. Wow. Chevet. We're mamish like, I'd say more than just getting our feet wet over here. I can't even say getting our feet wet. We're getting our hands wet or our feet wet? Directly or indirectly? Ooh, sheesh. Okay. So in conclusion, the first part of our daf talked about touching wine unintentionally. So according to Rashi and according to basically the Girsa of our Gemara, that's talking about a Ovid Kochavim as a complete fluke touched wine by way of a lulav. Tosfos says that he touched it, that there was no lulav. He asked a few kashas on that. Tosfos' Girsa actually is that he had touched it as a complete fluke, but directly. And the halacha is that Rav says it's osur to drink, but it's mutter to sell / benefit from. So it's osur b'shesiyah, mutter ba'anoyev. Then we talked about a 1-day-old baby making yayn nesech. Rav says osur to drink, mutter to sell / benefit from. Shmuel says mutter even to drink. Wow. Okay. That was Daf Nun Zayin, Daf 57 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.